who had walked across this stage. So I have some pretty high stilettos to fill today. Next month, I will turn 51. My 50th year has probably been one of the best of my life. And in a little bit, I'm going to tell you why. First, I thought I would share some of the lessons that I've learned during the first half of my century. And I say that because I have every intention of finishing the second half. These lessons have been hard-earned because sometimes you've really got to hit me over the head with a hammer. I'm a little stubborn. But they have made me who I am today, and I would not change that for anything in the world. I grew up reading books about Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and all the beautiful princesses who were saved by their prince, whisked away where they lived happily ever after. Does anyone remember reading those stories? When I was young, my father said to my sister and I, someday you're going to grow up and get married, and some lucky man is going to take care of you for the rest of your life. And that made a lot of sense to me, because I was privileged to be part of a family where my father did worship my mother and take care of her and nurture her. She is 75 years old, and she has not once ever pumped her own gas. She would not even know how. My father takes care of her. So when I found myself pregnant at 17, I did what I thought was the only logical thing, and I married the father of my child, Jimmy. I put all thoughts of college out of my head, and I settled down to be taken care of by my husband for the rest of my life. What a terrible responsibility and burden to put on the shoulders of a 23-year-old boy. One that had a burgeoning alcohol and drug addiction problem that blossomed completely while we were married, turning him into a very angry and violent man. Looking back, while there is no excuse for the physical and verbal abuse that he put upon my son and I can also see the fuel that I must have put on the fire by setting the responsibility of living happily ever after solely on the shoulders of my husband. A week before my 21st birthday, things came to a head one night when I ducked to miss the television that was being thrown at me, and I had my son in my arms at the time. Jimmy moved out the next evening. 4 months went by, and bad times turned to worse. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the coffee table in the living room of my 12-foot by 60-foot wide mobile home. Sitting on the coffee table, the television was, the cable television and the telephone were turned off because Jimmy had spent the money on cocaine. The heater was broken, and my breath was unfurling in front of me. I had a case of rice-a-roni and a pound of hamburger, and a little boy looking at me, asking me what was wrong and why was I crying. Do you have a boo-boo, he asked. No, I have a boo-boo, but it's in my heart, he said. Well, I'm going to kiss it, and I'm going to make it better. And Gary kissed me, planted a big, wet, sloppy kiss on my lips. And it occurred to me right then and there that maybe this whole princess story was a load of crap. Perhaps I wasn't going to have a prince who was going to whisk me off. And instead, I might just have to take care of myself. And in fact, not just myself, but this 3-year-old little boy standing in front of me, with a pot belly and dimples on his knees, and hands that were cradling my cheeks. And that was the moment that I became an adult. The men in the audience today may not understand the significance of this lesson, of how profound it was to realize that I was the architect of my life. After all, I don't remember ever reading a story about a princess who swooped in, saved the prince, and rode off with him on the back of her stallion into the sunset. Does anybody here remember that? For the women in the audience, I want to ask you, do you place the responsibility for your welfare, your happiness, and your fulfillment on the shoulders of somebody else? Are you still holding out for that prince who's going to come riding up and take you off into the sunset? Odds are, it ain't going to happen. And if it does, it's going to happen in a way far different than what you would expect. You have no one to hold responsible for where you are today, except for yourself and the decisions that you've made that put you in this room today. And the exciting part is that you are all the architects of your own life, and will make decisions moving forward on how you will spend that life. And for me, that is both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. I just didn't have it any other way. So at the ripe old age of 21, I had this epiphany. I was in charge of my life. I knew what my responsibilities were, and I was working 3 jobs at the time with the food on the table. I just couldn't see a future for myself. When I was growing up, the career options for me were to become a nurse, a librarian, a court stenographer, or a secretary. Does anybody my age or older remember those career options? Yeah. When I was signing up for my electives in 11th grade, my school counselor suggested that I take shorthand because you can always get a job if you know shorthand. To this day, I still know how to do a little B in shorthand. It's the only thing that I've retained. The problem was that none of those jobs really appealed to me. I was rudderless and just floated from secretarial job to secretarial job. And in my downtime, I would write poems and short stories, journal, but they were really just for me. I didn't share them with anyone. One of my jobs during the day was a typist at AT&T. I'll date myself right now, but in those days, the managers would handwrite their letters and their reports on long yellow tablets, and they would bring them up to the word processing department, and then we would type it up for them. That is when I learned that most of the managers could not take 5 words and string them together in a coherent sentence. And I was so bored that I just started rewriting all of their reports and their letters. When the young managers discovered that their letters and reports were coming back in far better shape than when they arrived, they started asking for me by name. This didn't go over very well in the word processing department. I would literally have a line of managers behind me patiently waiting for their turn for me to type up their stuff, while other typists in the word processing department sat and twiddled their thumbs. To this day, I'm convinced I got a promotion to administrative assistant just to get me out of the word processing department so that the group production numbers would rise. Things at home continue to be interesting. Gary and I were living in an apartment in the only area of town that I could afford. This apartment had very spacious rooms and tall ceilings. It also had a bullet hole in the plate glass window and a pretty big roach problem in the kitchen. When I came home at night, I had to be careful when I parked my car to not run over the crack vials that were on the pavement. Every other weekend, the court mandated that I send my son to visit his father. And every other weekend, on Sunday night, I would have to deal with the emotional damage that resulted from those visits. One Sunday, Gary was being particularly difficult, and he said, "That's it, you have to go to your room for timeout." And he looked at me and he was so furious, and he put his hands on his hips. He was 4 years old. He looked at me and he says, "Well, my dad says that you're an effing bitch anyway." And then, he didn't say effing. And then he went into his room and he slammed his bedroom door and he punched his fist through the glass in his bedroom window. And I learned later that his father had done that over the weekend to a wall when he was particularly angry at Gary. Luckily, Gary didn't cut his hand so much. And I was sort of cleaning up the mess. And so he calmed down and I asked him, I said, "So how did that make you feel?" And he threw his arms around me and he said, "So sad, so sad." That was the moment that I realized the power of words. Sticks and stones might break your bones, but words will break your heart. I thought of all the hateful things that Jimmy had said to me over the past 4 years. Words that had beaten me down to the point where I had no self-worth. And now I saw it happening to my son, and I was powerless to fix it. The one thing you know about words is that once you say them out loud, you can never, ever take them back. We each have a choice, and we can use our words for good or for evil. I have never forgotten that day, and since then, I have tried very hard not to say anything out loud that would hurt somebody or break their spirit. Shortly after this incident, I was complaining to a coworker that I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And she suggested that I go out and attend a goal-setting workshop. Well, I thought this was very interesting. I hadn't really heard a lot about goal-setting and didn't know anything about motivational tapes and books. And I went there and boy, I drank the Kool-Aid. I thought this was great. And they broke us into groups, and each small group had to share one of their goals with the rest of the group. And one man in the group spoke and he said, "I want to make $250,000 next year." I thought that was awesome. First of all, I didn't know you could make $250,000 a year. And I just love the way it rolled off his lips, $250,000. I was like, wow, I was so impressed. And then the next woman spoke, and she said, "I'd like to have my MBA. I want to get my MBA. and everyone was oohed and awed, and I thought that was great. And I didn't really know what an MBA was, but I thought maybe I would get one of those too. It came to be my turn, and I sat there and looked at everybody, and I said, I'd like to have a comma in my checkbook on a regular basis. And they all laughed, because they thought I was joking. And I'm pretty sure I was the only person in that room who had $6.27 to their name, and was waiting until 5 days till the next payday. So after the workshop, I approached the man, and I asked him what he did for a living. And he said he was in sales. It's like, oh, sweet, that is the job for me. I thought it would be great, even if I could make enough money where I was only working one job. Right? That would be awesome. And so for the next several years, that's what I did. I sold a lot of different things. And I discovered that I enjoy just about every aspect of sales, except the fact that you have to recreate yourself every quarter. You start out from zero. Anyone who's in sales knows it is really a what have you done for me lately kind of job. The most gratifying sale that I ever made, and the hardest deal that I ever closed, was marrying my husband, Bob. I spent 4 years shamelessly pursuing this man and proposing to him at every opportunity. And I'm proud to say that I finally closed that deal, and he succumbed and he married me in June of 1990. Bob had 2 sons from a previous marriage, and I had Gary. And shortly after we got married, I learned a new term. When a woman I had just met asked if Bob and I were a blended family. And I looked at her and I said, no, we're both white. She explained to me that the term meant we were bringing children in from a previous marriage. So, when are the 2 of you going to have one of your own, people would ask. And I would wonder what they thought the other 3 were. I mean, if we were going to have one of our own and that meant we could return a couple of the others, I would have taken that deal in a heartbeat. How many step-parents do we have in the room? Raise your hand. Well, God bless you, because step-parenting is probably one of the most difficult jobs on the planet. I wouldn't trade my boys for anything in the world, but that first year of marriage just about did me in. 6 months into being married to Bob, I woke up one morning crying. I could not stop crying. I cried all the way to work. I cried at work. I cried at lunch. And I called Dr. Latimer and said, I need to see you tonight. Something is really bad. So he agreed, and I went to see my doctor. God bless him. I walk in, and he says, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, I'm having a nervous breakdown. And he looked at me, well, I don't believe in a nervous breakdown, first of all. So we're going to call it the NB thing. Why do you think you're having an NB? I said, I'm a stepmother, and I need drugs. And he looked at me, and unfortunately, he refused to give me drugs. Instead, he made me sit down and write everything I was doing during the week and a typical day. And about halfway through, he just started laughing hysterically. He goes, you're doing the work of like 3 people. You can't do all that, and nor should you have to. I was like, wait a minute, what? I don't have to do it all? What a concept. And here was my doctor not only telling me that I couldn't do it all, but I didn't have to. And so we sat down and we made a list of everything that I was doing during the week. And we figured out what I could offload on my kids, what I could put Bob in charge of, and what I could hire somebody else to do. Talk about the world's greatest prescription. The next morning, I met with Bob, and he said, we're going to get a maid service. It's going to come every other weekend. He looked at me and goes, I don't know maid service. I'm not sure if we can afford that. I said, well, too bad. We're going to come every other Friday, and coincidentally, it costs about the same amount as our monthly cable television bill. So if we can't afford it, we can let cable go. Well, it's been 23 years, and we still have cable, and we still have maid service. And so here's what I want to tell the women in the room. You really, really cannot do it all. And so stop trying, and start figuring out what you can delegate and what you can outsource. And I know that you've all heard about this before. And I would bet many of you have thought to yourself, yeah, but they're just not going to do it right, and they're not going to do it as well as I can do it. So I might as well just go ahead and do it myself, because, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, forget that. If they can do it 70% as good as you could do it, take it. Just take it. And then take that extra time that you have and do things that feed your soul and that make you a better person, and your family want to spend more time with you. So if you know me and you've read my book or my blog, you will know that you'll be aware of the very special relationship that I have with my husband. I count my blessings every day that he agreed to marry me. And the past 23 years have not been without its difficulties, but for the most part, we've been able to laugh through the hard times together. Plus, he is a never-ending source of material for my blog and my book. And at this point, I'm pretty convinced he has his own fan club. Bob has also been my very biggest supporter whenever it comes to taking chances. Given some of the things that I've done recently, it would be reasonable for those of you who know me to think that I am someone who is brave. That really isn't quite true. There have literally been hundreds of times during our marriage when I have been faced with a big decision, a project, or a challenge, and I have cried and cried in front of Bob. I've said, I can't do it. I bit off more than I could chew. I'm going to let everyone down. And every single time, Bob has listened to me while I moaned and groaned, usually with his arms crossed, and he's looking at me over his glass, and he's like this. And then when I'm done, he just dismisses it all. It has never occurred to him that I would fail. And so after a decade of this, I guess the bravery and the abilities that he saw in me began to manifest itself. I still do things that frighten me. I take on projects that are bigger than I think I can handle, and I worry about failing. But I approach everything with a lot more courage than I did in the past. I've had this support for so long that I'm afraid I take it for granted sometimes. However, watching the dissolution of a friend's marriage recently reminded me of how fortunate I am, and also how important it is in a relationship to have somebody that believes in you. Life is tough enough as it is, and it's hard to keep a positive attitude sometimes. And I can't imagine what my life would be like if I didn't have the support of my friends and my family, and most importantly, my husband, who believe in me and give me a push when I need it. That is the last and most important lesson that I want to share with you today. While you really can't choose your family, I'm sure many of us wish we could, but we can't choose our family, we can choose the people that we let into our lives. I made a conscious decision years ago to choose my friendships very carefully. I decided that I would spend my time with people who genuinely loved me, supported me, and made me feel better about myself and the world that we live in. And I also made the promise to return that to them. Many of you, my friends, are in the room today, and that means the world to me. Because thanks to all of you, my 50th year has been one of the best in my life so far. When I decided to celebrate my 50th birthday by climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, none of you laughed at me. You made it clear that you were not going with me, especially when you found out there would be no spies along the way. But you encouraged me and you asked me questions about my adventure, and you made sure that I was training properly. I know you worried, but you did it quietly, behind my back. I summited Mount Kilimanjaro on the morning of my 50th birthday. My fellow climbers sang happy birthday to me, and because we were at 50% oxygen, it sounded like Marilyn Monroe singing happy birthday. But it really was one of the most incredible days of my life, and I felt then and there that I could do anything. When I got fired from my job in March, my boss and I could not get along, imagine that. I announced I was going to finish my book, and all of you who had been nagging me for 4 years to do just that were thrilled for me. And my husband, God bless him, when I told him I wasn't going to immediately look for a job, but instead write this book and get it published, was just the epitome of support. He didn't say, in his head he was like probably thinking, so when are you going to do something that will make money? But instead, he just kissed me, wished me luck, and went off to work every day to let me write that book. Some of you helped me edit the stories, select the stories, and judge my cover options, and you listened to me moan and groan during the publishing process. When the book came out, at the end of June, you were all the first to go online and buy it, post reviews on Amazon, and bug me about the book launch party. It's coming. And the sense of pride that I have when I look at my book is indescribable. So throughout the years, you've watched me launch companies, close failed companies, and that's a totally different speech. Lose jobs, get jobs. And you've never failed to tell me that you believe in me. When I told you that I wanted to go back to school and finally get that college degree, you didn't laugh or tell me, oh, you don't need to do that, you're too old, you don't need to do that. And instead, you told me it was a great idea. And if you follow my Facebook posts, you will know that the pursuit of that degree has not been easy, because apparently I can no longer add. And somewhere along the way, Pluto got taken off of the planet list, and I just did not see that coming. Regardless, I am delighted to tell everyone that I will finish my LANSA course at the end of this month, and I will earn my Bachelor of Science in Marketing before my 51st birthday. So as you can see, it has been a very busy year for me and an extremely gratifying one. I don't know what I would have done without all of you by my side. I also want you to be forewarned. I still have another half-century to go, and a lot more lessons that I need to learn. And whatever I've planned, I'm going to need all of your help and support. And so I suggest that you start taking vitamins now. Thank you.